Are we heading for a summer of discontent? We've had a couple of those in recent years, have we not, with various strikes from public sector workers? But are we heading to one again? Let's talk to Michael Simmons. He's economics editor of The Spectator. Very good afternoon to you.
Afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. Well, we've got these independent pay review bodies who've recommended pay rises of around the 3% or the 4% mark, depending on which public sector workers you are. Some actually more for police officers, soldiers and others who cannot go on strike. But looking at teachers getting 4%, NHS workers around the 3% mark. Now, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, said, well, your budgets are set for your department, so if you're going to give those pay rises, other things will have to be cut back. Of course, otherwise, we'd be facing more tax rises in the autumn, which, let's face it, we probably are by stealth, or more borrowing, which we can't afford to do. In which case, we've now got the threat of strike threats. How serious do you think those threats are?
Yeah, listen, I think the strike threats are pretty serious. It's certainly going to be an unhappy summer because, as you laid out there, we don't know exactly what the pay review bodies are going to recommend, but in some cases it could be around the 5% mark. And the Treasury has been pretty clear that they will fund up to, I think it's something about 2.8%, which means that difference, each department, each organisation is going to have to decide, do they make cuts to then pay for the rest of that recommendation, in which case services are going to get worse and voters are going to be unhappy, or they're going to try and stand their ground against the unions. And we've seen, over the past few years, certainly under the last government, that the unions are more ready than ever, really, to strike, and they've had success because what did Labour do as soon as they came in? They effectively gave in to most of the demands.
Said, we're just going to get around the table. They got around the table and said, here's some money. It isn't the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't, in a way, you can't blame the unions. Their tactics work. So I think they're going to keep doing them. I think speaking to people in Labour, there was a feeling that some of the unions would maybe go easy on them because they support the Labour Party, but I don't think there's signs that is going to happen. So I think
absolutely not. And here's the thing. And again, we talked about this on the show yesterday. The reality is, we are talking about people, particularly in the NHS and teachers, who have seen real terms pay cuts over the last 20 years. They were real terms pay cuts in the austerity years. Now, before that time, people said, oh, public sector did really badly under the Osborne and Cameron years. In fact, the private sector done really badly before then. They hadn't had those pay rises because the economy was in a bad state. And then lots of people hit, with the inflation we've had in recent years. These pay rises might look like big pay rises compared to where we are with inflation right now, but they will be still just in a situation where even after these pay rises, they still will be earning less than they did in real terms 20 years ago. Now, that may be the case for a lot of other workers in the private sector, but the reality is we've got a shortage of teachers, got a shortage of nurses and other healthcare workers. Economically, I did, economics at uni, economics 101, supply and demand. You need to increase the supply. How do you do that? Well, put up the wages. Might that actually be the most sensible thing for the government to do?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's certainly true. And that is why the pay review bodies, if they do come up with these recommendations that would be above inflation, because remember, we're expecting inflation of about 3% this year. So 5% would be well above that for pay rises. And that will be the motivation, to get people into teaching, to get people into nursing. The question, is how do we pay for that? I think if the Treasury wants to be smart about this, there is one potential solution, and that's looking at public sector pensions. Most of us in the private sector will be contributing something like 5% into our pensions, and our employer will be putting in similar. But if you take, some NHS workers, they have massive pension contributions of nearly 20%. Yeah. And what the government could say specifically for young people is,
that's just by their employer. They're not putting anything in. It's just by their employer.
Yes, exactly. That is just basically from the government. So the government could say, look, we're already spending this money. If we want to attract people into these professions, why don't we say, we'll give you that money up front in the form of a pay rise, and you'll have a much smaller pension contribution. And I think a lot of people would actually take them up on that.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
there are other ways to find the money, but it's whether the Treasury wants to.
But the reality, part of the difficulties a lot of departments have got is created by the Chancellor herself. When you put up minimum wage, a lot of people would agree with minimum wage going up to a higher rate that people can actually live on. That you put the minimum wage up, lots of people working in public sector are on minimum wage. When you put up national insurance payments from employers and lower the threshold, the point at which people start paying it. That has been a huge cost for the public sector, not to mention the energy bills as well. So actually there are huge extra costs just to provide services that stand still in the public sector, same as for private businesses, exactly the same. But a lot of that is caused by government policy and Rachel Reeves' own decisions.
Yeah, well, fundamentally, it comes down to how big we want Britain as a state to be. You know, since COVID, we've expected more and more from what the government does. That size has got bigger. Although the tax burden has gone up with it to a record high, the actual individual tax rates are kind of relatively lower than countries with similarly large states. Yeah. So I think ultimately the decision that is being put off by Reeves and, to be honest, all parties, is if we say we want to keep a state that big, then the basic rate of income tax is going to have to go up by 1 or 2%.
And the rest.
That's what's coming down the line.
And that's the reality. And we talk about the public services like healthcare in an awful lot of European countries. And again, they've got very different, social insurance policies from ours because no one copied the NHS for a reason. But they pay a lot higher basic rate tax, don't we, though? It's all going to be resolved by a new milkshake tax. The sugar tax, apparently, is going to be extended, we're told by the sources in the government, from just fizzy drinks to things like pre-packaged milkshakes and pre-packaged lattes. That's going to solve the obesity crisis and, of course, raise loads of money for the Treasury. Job done, Michael.
Yeah, well, look, it's total nonsense, as we know. There's still plenty of obese people around. Obesity soared during the pandemic. These taxes don't make a difference. All they do is they bring in a little amount of money so that the Chancellor can say, oh, she's met her fiscal rules and she's kept a tiny bit of headroom. It's just putting off the inevitable, which is eventually a government is going to have to make a decision. Do taxes go up massively across the board, or do we decide to shrink the state? Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe we could cut taxes and cut the state. That would be a good idea, wouldn't it? Michael Simmons, economics editor at The Spectator. Thank you as always for joining us. Benjamin Butterworth, again, you come from the left. You like a big state on the left, don't you? You think the state is better at doing everything, telling us what we can eat and drink, telling us how to run businesses, telling us how to, live our lives. So you'd want a bigger state, wouldn't you?
Well, I think the sugar tax worked because Iron Brew changed their recipe in order to avoid it.
Everyone stopped buying Iron Brew.
And so
they stopped buying Iron Brew.
That's a lot of sugar that people have been saved.
But the thing is, if you don't want to drink, diet drinks are bigger, by the way, they're bigger in sales than the fizzy drinks with all the real sugar in. You've got an alternative. If you want to drink a high sugar drink, have a high sugar drink. If you don't want to have a high sugar drink, you don't have to buy one. Why does the government have to get involved?
Well, I think price is a big determinant of those things.
Why does the government have to get involved? What's it got to do with the government if someone wants to have a load of sugar hit?
But I think that people will be less likely to do that, and you should encourage
people... What's it got to do with the government?
You should nudge
What's it got to do with the government, what people want to drink?
Well, in this country, it's got a lot to do with the government because you pay for it when they get sick or when they need their teeth doing.
Oh.
So that's...
Well, that's a different argument,
I think that's quite a reasonable one. On the pay of workers, I think I have a lot of sympathy with people that are struggling to make ends meet on the same jobs that 20 years ago paid a lot better.
The same as the private sector, but they can't afford to give them the pay rises because they've got paying more on national insurance.
Private sector pay rises have been higher in the last couple of years than public sector pay rises. So
yeah, but they don't get the pensions. We actually took at the package that people got.
Totally agree.
That's the reality.